Alrighty, gamers, how's it going? Daybreaker Rein here, coming at you through your video scope with the Just Another Gaming Rant live. And I'm here again today with my brother Xanthan. And we are going to be having a mostly civil discussion, I would say, about the PS1 versus the N64. We had been talking about doing this discussion for, like, what, a month, I feel like?
More. I think I brought it up right after we did the Final Fantasy VII Remake one.
Yeah, that would probably make sense. So
I feel like it was soon after that, anyway.
Yeah, it was kind of shortly after I think we did that one, because, like, I was really, at the time, like, I was really passionate about wanting to do more of these, because I thought it would be really fun. So, because I had a lot of fun with the Final Fantasy VII discussion, and I get to do it all again with the IAS guys here on Sunday, so that's gonna be fun. I hope I'll hit like a lot of the points that I made in the last video. If I don't, or if my opinion changes, I'll have to like be like, go watch this one, because it was all still fresh in my mind when I did that one with Xanthan. Anyways,
right.
So we're going to kick off this podcast by talking about starting with just kind of a brief overview of our histories with and experiences with both systems. I know with you particularly, I know that like the N64 is kind of not as prominent to you as it was to me. So I'll let you take the floor first.
Yeah, the N64 was the console I played first.
Oh, really?
I was probably 4 or 5. I think 4, because of where we were living at the time. And my brother got it, actually. And he would bring it over when he would come over to visit.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember playing Mario 64, and I remember seeing Ocarina of Time. Wasn't allowed to play Ocarina of Time, though. But I already had a Super Nintendo, or I was about to get one. I'd been playing video games. I just can't remember the exact order of everything.
Right.
But I played the N64 first, but given how much older my brother is than me, after that, he was growing up and doing his own things, so he wasn't visiting as often, and so I didn't get to play the N64 as much.
Okay.
Do you want me to go into the history with the PS1 as well?
Oh, yeah, sure. Go for it.
So, obviously, I have more experience with the PlayStation 1. Even to this day, I have not played the N64 as much. It's kind of the point behind this debate, I think, or podcast, really.
Discussion.
But that's the best way to put it. The PS1 I got when I was, I got it for my 9th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
Which, to age myself a little bit, I got it after the PS2 had already come out, so that was why we were able to get it, because it was a lot cheaper.
Oh, right, yeah.
So, I didn't even get an original PlayStation. I got the PS1, the smaller
Yeah.
sized console.
Okay.
Yeah, so I had that for a year or two and it broke actually, but I got a PS2 right away, so I wasn't without my PlayStation games for very long.
Right. Yeah, I mean, super nice for the PS2 to be like mostly, as far as I know, it's fully backwards compatible with the PS1 library. Like, I don't think there's any. I think there's like one or two odd games that might not work, but you get pretty much full backwards compatibility for the most
Yeah,
part.
I've never heard. I mean, I don't want to get into it too much on this discussion, but I'm pretty sure the CD-ROM laser that's in the PS1 is also in the PlayStation 2. So as far as I know, there's no reason anything wouldn't be backwards compatible.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So for me, I don't remember if I've ever really talked about this. I'm sure in one of the IAS podcasts I probably brought it up or had discussions with them. But for me, I didn't start with the PS1. I didn't get a PS1 until much later, and much like you, I got the second model. I don't think we had the first model. My recollection is I don't remember having that model. I remember having the small, slim, white model. But I started actually with the N64 and the Sega Saturn. I actually got both systems. My dad was just like, "Hey, here's these new systems for you guys to try out." So that was actually the first set of consoles I started with in that specific generation of consoles. I didn't get the PS1 until much later. So I played a lot more N64 growing up, and I really feel like I probably did play that more because it was a lot easier to play with my friends at the time. A lot of the local neighborhood kids at the time had N64s, and so it was excuse me, a lot easier to just like grab my controller and be like, "Hey, let's go play this game." And plug it in instead of having like these weird apparatuses and stuff like you had to have with the PS1. So N64 was very much more prominent. Spent a lot of time playing it, a lot of time playing multiplayer, especially because I grew up with two brothers and a sister all living in the same house. So it was just more beneficial for us to have a system that was just easier for everything to be compatible right away instead of having to buy extra stuff.
Right, and you already bring up a good point about both of these consoles. Is that growing up, I only had an older sister, and my dad would play too, but we eventually did get a multi-tap, but a lot of times it was, okay, here's the set of games that me and my dad play, and then here's the set of games that me and my sister play.
Yeah.
So the PlayStation 2 only having the PlayStation 1 having only two controller ports wasn't an issue in my household. And I grew up in a neighborhood that didn't have very many kids, so it didn't matter.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that if I had more friends that were constantly asking to all play games together, I might have asked for an N64. But I'll get into later, like the specific reason I know I asked for a PlayStation 1.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I don't think I put that anywhere in the dots or in the docs.
No, it's fine. It's just something that came to my mind.
Oh no,
Because because of how you're explaining about, okay, well, you've got a bunch of siblings, get the console that's going to facilitate that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was fun times to be had. But when we did eventually get the PS1, I do remember. I mean, I still have a couple of the original games that I owned when we first got our PS1. A lot of them eventually got lost or sold off, but there was a couple like Crash Team Racing, for example. That's my original copy. Never had another copy of the game. But we did get a multi-tap specifically for that purpose, and it was like years later, after going through various boxes and stuff, I actually found our original multi-tap. So it was just this kind of crazy, like, oh my god, we actually had this still, and it still works. So
is it the boomerang one?
Yeah, it's the boomerang.
I have seen multiple types, but maybe I'm hallucinating.
There are multiple. I know for the PS2 there's multiple types, but for PS1 the only one I ever knew was the boomerang. If there is other types,
maybe I'm conflating it with the PS2's multi-tap, which is just a box.
Yeah, it could be very well that there was another model from like an off party, because the official Sony one was the boomerang one. But yeah, just
funny story that you brought that up. The way we got the multi-tap, we did the old school trick where it wasn't. So back in the day, for people that don't know, not everything was behind like the keyed cases. So the way that we got the multi-tap is I think it was at Kmart, and it was just on a hook. So what we actually did, because we didn't have money to get it at the time, is we took it off the hook and we put it behind like another box and came back a week later to get it. It was still there, which was funny.
That's
Insane. That's some old school. We don't have money for layaway tricks.
I think I remember trying to do stuff, but it never usually worked out. It was like, oh, hey, I want this toy or whatever. It's the only one they have. I'm gonna hide it somewhere. Like, I'm gonna go put it with the Barbies so nobody will find it. And it's like, usually 9 times out of 10 that didn't work. But yeah,
I think now stores have more attentive people for the aisles. They put stuff back where it's supposed to be.
Well, I mean, point in case, we don't have the ghetto stores that didn't care, like Kmart and Hastings anymore. They closed.
Yeah,
they're gone. You know, so that's why, because they didn't care. Oh. Okay, so we've kind of gone over like just a brief introduction of what our experiences with the systems were. So you said that the first one you actually played was the N64, much like myself, and then later down the line played the PS1.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so I want to say that because I did another bullet point about having the trying to remember the first experience with the other system. So like with the PS1, I think it was just on a whim that like my family bought one. I don't even think I remember like playing it at like any sort of kiosk or anything. I might have, because Sears and Target and all them had those back in the day. Shout outs to PlayStation Underground. That shit was awesome. I missed demo discs. Those are so freaking cool. I would spend hours playing the one demo disc I had because it had like Medieval, Tiny Tank, and I think it had a demo for Brave Fencer Musashi. And I would spend just hours freaking playing that demo disc over and over again, same levels. But yeah, like I think like my first like real hands-on experience was when I played it when my family bought one. Did you end up actually playing the PlayStation 1 first, like at a kiosk or anything like that?
The place I played it was really weird. Not to go too deep into my background, but I wasn't in public school for very long. Explains a lot about me. But I just remember I was able to make a couple of friends, or I had cousins before I was pulled out of school, and so there would just be times where I'd go over to friends and they'd be like, "Oh, I have this," and to my tiny world, video games was Nintendo and nothing else.
Right.
So, like when I go over and people are like, "I have an Atari," I'm like, "What? This is video games?" Okay. Right. So the same thing happened with the PlayStation. One of my friends got it, and they had Crash 2. Mm-hmm. I distinctly remember playing the Polar Bear level, and my brain couldn't handle it. Then, a little bit later, I don't think I'm jumping too far ahead with this, but a little bit later, I ended up moving next door to my uncle, and when his sons would visit, they were spoiled. So they had a PlayStation and an N64, and one time they brought the PlayStation over, and they had Spyro, and that was the thing that made me go, I have to have this.
Yeah.
It was like 2000 or 2001 is when that would have happened.
Okay. Yeah, like, it was kind of funny, like, I do remember, like, playing different systems. Like, I think, like, the very first time I ever played, like, the Dreamcast, for example, was through, like, a Sears kiosk. Because they had it with, like, one of those, like, demo reel that had, like, a couple, like, like Sonic Adventure and, like, Crazy Taxi and stuff like that. But, like, yeah, it's kind of weird, like, the most prominent kiosks I remember were the N64 ones, especially because the one McDonald's that we have here where we live, they had those in the play area for, like, frickin' ever, for, like, the longest time. And I remember that being more prominent than the PlayStation 1 having a market here. So it's just kind of strange that was how it was. I'm sure in bigger cities that had way more population and way more variety of stores than what we have here, I'm sure that like there were tons of places that had kiosks for like PlayStation 1 and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think to our area there was kind of a cultural thing behind the N64. I think, I don't remember seeing a lot of Walkmans growing up. I remember seeing them, but not a lot. So, like, maybe culturally in our town, there wasn't the brand trust for like Sony or like the awareness. You know, video games was Nintendo. Because I remember all the kids in school, again, before it was pulled, all they would talk about is the N64. I never heard mention of PlayStation until I went over to a different friend's house who didn't talk about video games at school. So
yeah, and I kind of had that. I distinctly remember too, like that when Microsoft came into the game with the Xbox, that really got a foothold here. Like the X, like it wasn't until like it was so funny because it was like growing up that was what the kids talked about. That they would talk about Halo and Fable, and I'm like, what the fuck are you guys talking about? Like, why are you not talking about the cool shit that Sony has? They have Lord of the Rings, you know. I don't know. It's just like, you know.
No, that's exactly how I felt when people would talk about stuff that was, or rather, to my knowledge, I thought was only on the N64. I remember kids obsessing over Star Fox, and I just had no idea.
Yeah.
Even though Star Fox is on the Super Nintendo, and I had a Super Nintendo.
Right.
You know, small worlds.
Yeah, I didn't actually play the original Star Fox until way later, until after I'd already beaten to death freaking Star Fox 64. Yeah, it's kind of crazy, but yeah, it's so weird when that barrier is broken. Like it's like your mind just is like, holy crap, this has been going on, and I've just had this little bubble of like oh, this is my gaming world. Everybody else is talking about this other world that I'm not a part of, but then like once you shatter that barrier, you're just like, holy shit, there's so much.
Right, and information was just so much more limited even 20 years ago.
Oh my
God. It's like not all of us got magazines even, or even looked at them in the store.
God, a little side tangent. I remember printing out, like, I still have it somewhere. It's a cheat code folder full of printouts. And yo, Ghoul World Order, Kaneki, thank you for the host, man. Really appreciate it. But yeah, I remember printing out freaking cheat codes at school.
See, I had to make my brother do that for me because he had internet.
Yeah, like, well, I only had internet at school for the longest time, but we were getting a little bit derailed on the core subject of this. So, but that happens. That happens. And I prefer it be that than like all, you know, formulaic and we can only talk about these specific things. It's my podcast. Right. I can do whatever the fuck I want. Anyways, so we're gonna move on to our next point, and this is kind of broken down I have several bullet points for this particular thing, but it's like our overall thoughts of both the systems, so the PlayStation 1 and the N64, and I've got a couple bullet points. So it's like we could talk about design, the controller options, game selection, and game design / packaging for the games. So
okay, so I have an input of how we could do this. Let's both do one console and then the other. That way we can kind of line up both our thoughts.
Okay. If you want to take the floor and you go first, be my guest.
So the N64 is garbage. No, it's a running joke. I'm very hyperbolic about my opinions about the N64, but it's because of my perspective on it. You know, I'm blown away by it when I'm little. I don't get to play it after that.
Yeah.
So it kind of just fades from my mind. Well, so to explain, but what was the first point on our list? Actually, was it controllers and console design?
Design was the first point that I had.
Okay, so I was almost jumping ahead, but so the actual body of the console is fine. Mm-hmm. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is it the first console that you could get different colors of?
Not at launch. I could be mistaken about that, but I think the colors, like the alternate variant colors, came later. I don't think there was any options.
Like, for example, you couldn't get a red Genesis or a blue Super Nintendo.
Very true. Yes. So I would say that, yeah, probably. I would say Nintendo was probably the one that probably put that foothold here.
Right, and they had already done it with the Game Boy.
Yeah.
So,
and the Game Boy Pocket. So.
Mm-hmm. So that aspect of it, I really like. You know, if they weren't so damn expensive, every console I would own would be red. But that requires reinvesting in consoles I already own, and sometimes they're expensive. So to kick the ball off on that, I gotta give appreciation to Nintendo. The actual like shape of the console, again, it's fine, but it doesn't stand out either. I mean, bonus points that it doesn't look like the American Super Nintendo, which I think looks a little goofy.
Yeah.
I think the Famicom looks a little better, the Super Famicom. But like it's cool, but it's whatever to me.
Mm-hmm.
The controller, again, not to sound hyperbolic, I do get very upset about the controller.
A lot of people
do.
A lot of people do.
But at the same time, you gotta say, well, it's the first analog stick. I mean, there's got to be some weird Pong console that has an analog stick, right?
Oh, I'm sure.
But as far as like, okay, this is like a big deal console, So, and I remember playing the N64 and not even understanding why it was important.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't understand the level of sensitivity that the thing has.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about that before with the aftermarket controllers. Some of them can't get it right.
Yeah, none of them really do. I've run the gauntlet with that, so I'll talk more about that when I get to my end. But yeah,
right. So other than the I mean, what I'm trying to say is that it's comfortable but clumsy. I think it's less the trident shape that bothers me, and it's more how the face buttons are laid out.
Yeah.
With the C buttons and all of that being these weird dedicated buttons to camera control. But in hindsight, as much as it upsets me, I can't actually be too upset about it because it's like they're trying to figure out what to do, know. But we're talking about playing it in the modern day. 100%, I will say never touch an actual N64 controller unless you're really particular about it being like a quote unquote original experience. Yeah. I will 100% of the time tell people, no, go buy this Hori controller that feels a lot better.
Yeah, it's unfortunate with that specific controller though that the market it's people know that it's good and it's quality. They don't make them anymore, and so it's just become an expensive aftermarket controller. And a lot of the times, it's just cheaper to get either like a third party controller that's still developed, or go and get just an original controller and just replace the stick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's a particular situation. Like I say, if you're going to be playing a lot of N64, it would be worth the investment.
Yeah.
So, go ahead about the design then, I guess.
So pretty much what you said. I mean, I have a lot of the similar notions of it. For me, it serves this purpose. It's not like the design isn't like this obtuse weird thing like you said. Kind of the Super Nintendo, the American Super Nintendo in any case, really was with its kind of like long back, and it was very oddly shaped. The N64 does have some odd things about its design, but overall it serves the purpose well enough. Probably one of the biggest draws, at least to me, with its design is the fact that it has the 4 controller inputs already on the system, which I wish more consoles would do. Everybody's dropping back to like we're only going to put one USB port on the front and just hope you have...
Why now is everybody copying the 3DO?
Yeah, no idea. And the CDI. I think the CDI did that same shit.
Yeah, I meant the CDI, not no, both of them. You're right. Anyway,
yeah, well,
sorry.
Like 3DO, a little side tangent. 3DO, it has the one port, and then you have to have an official controller, and that has the second player port.
Yeah, you have to daisy chain.
Yeah, you have to
That's
daisy
what I was
chain
trying
your
to think of.
controllers. Yeah, but yeah, so it has all the right stuff. It's got a dust cover for the cartridge slot. Cartridges fit in nicely. There's never it never feels like there's any sort of like issue getting cartridges in or out. Granted, I've always played with moderately kept N64s. I don't know how it was for people and for other people. They might have had friends who just didn't take care of it and it got sticky or whatever, and it was a pain in the ass to pull cartridges in and out. you know, um, but yeah, I will agree that the standard like default gray model, it's not really eye catching. Like it definitely doesn't have anything that pops out like when you display it. Which is why I would say that I definitely like the colored systems more, especially because they really chose colors that were bright and vibrant. So regardless of which one you get, even like the smoke gray colored system, that one still pops out more than just the default like matte gray that the original console had. And so I would say that that is definitely something. The power adapter is kind of weird. Like I hate that it's this big block that goes in the back and then just comes out to a regular cord. I'm glad that a lot of companies have started to get away from that. It took
Mm-hmm.
forever, but they finally are. But I think it should have just been just like just plugs in like via regular cord. Um, but other than that, it serves its purpose, powers the system. The video port serves its purpose, and it was a universal port for not only the Super Nintendo, the N64, but also the GameCube. It used the same port. I have to kind of give Nintendo props for that. That's pretty like holy shit. Like, hey, you can use the same cable. Like, you don't have to buy like 18 different cables to get your systems working.
Right, and it's convenient.
Yeah, yeah. So that's why I would. That's my thoughts on the design. In any case,
And so, what's our next point?
controller options.
You're going to have to take the lead on this one because I don't know
Okay.
anything that is on the N64 other than the Hori
The,
controller and the Trident controller.
okay. So I don't necessarily know. This was kind of one of those things. Like I brought this up just because I do know. Like I've seen several reviews of PlayStation add-ons that I had no idea existed in terms of controlling options. So
Mm-hmm.
like the N64 has all sorts of different stuff. There's one that's a race wheel, and it's a wheel mounted on a remote, basically. So there's that. It's made specifically for racing games and apparently does the job well when you play it and when you use it for racing games. It's the weirdest fucking thing.
Well,
There's
it's good that it exists because there's tons of racing games.
yeah, there is definitely a lot of racing games for the N64. Probably more so than I think the PlayStation. PlayStation did have good ones though, and we'll get more on that later. Um, there is the very very odd arcade stick. I do not know if you've seen that thing. If you need me to go grab a picture,
I'm, I'm looking up all of the stuff right now.
yeah, there's the N64 arcade stick,
Dear
which is
Lord.
yeah, it's the fucking weirdest thing. I can't even imagine trying to use that to play fighting games. There was
Well,
also
there's
some
another one that
yeah,
has a flight stick on the right, and then uh, an arcade stick on the left, and then it's actual arcade style buttons in the middle. Like if the flight stick wasn't there, that would be interesting. But wow.
yeah. Then there's also something I think is called like the Supa pad or something like that. It's this really weird like it's like a massive growth that like kind of comes out the side. Like you got your stick and your D-pad over
Oh,
here,
I'm
I think,
looking
and
at
then like
it.
all your buttons are faced up like a traditional arcade style. Like it's the 6 buttons. Yeah, like there are just so many just like off the wall controllers. And to this day, there are still companies that are making third party controllers. I actually am. I say this as a recommendation for at least the action, adventure, and probably racing games, and just anything that's not an FPS. But Retrobit has done what is called the Retrobit Tribute, and that controller it emulates the design of the Hiyori controller that everybody knows about. The stick is not as good, unfortunately. It falls flat in the FPS department. It's way too sensitive. Your cursor goes all over the goddamn place, which is unfortunate because aside from that, that controller would be a stellar replacement because it's super affordable. It's like $24.99. It's comes in a variety of colors, like 3 or 4 different colors. So that is one thing I will also say about Nintendo, especially when it comes to the official controllers, is that good lord, there's a fucking mountain of colors you can get. like colors that the system didn't even come in. It's like you want speckled freaking polka dot design. It's probably out there. And it's super cool because you can if one breaks, you can swap out faceplates and mix and match colors like I did with mine. So, but yeah, controller options, there's a plenty. I'm sure there's a controller out there for everybody. In terms of aftermarket, I recommend the Retrobit Tribute for most games. For FPS games, there's another one. I think it's called the Hyperkin Commander. And that one, its stick is really good, and it's not super sensitive for FPS games. So it's like, it isn't the traditional design, which is it's in the Triton design, which is the only shit part about it. But it has a good stick, and it's good for everything, including FPS games. And I think it's around the same price range as the Retrobit Tribute.
Cool. I mean, I don't have much to add. The discussion is a little lopsided because I've played so little,
right?
Especially with actual hardware. But I didn't know about that super pad. I would honestly use that if it was available.
The design,
like if somebody handed it to me, I'd be like, I'll take that controller.
It's kind of crazy because I've actually had hands-on with that controller, and the design is fucking atrocious. It looks awful, but it holds so nice. Like it really feels nice in the hands.
There's a Razor or a Hori, I believe it's the Hori Fighting Commander, is actually shaped like that, where the right hand has more grip than the left. So I don't know which came first, like if maybe they're pulling from a design that predates both of them or what. But
yeah, it's kind of just an interesting oddity in the N64 controller option catalog.
So then games and packaging is next, I think?
Game selection I had as the next point.
Okay. This I did a little bit of research on before our podcast. Specifically, I was looking into the lack thereof of people who really want to collect N64. And I think it's mostly that it's one of those cases where everybody got what they want already. So there's not a lot of people left over that want to collect for it. But it's a very weird system to collect for, especially in the sense of a completionist collection. Because I've seen people talking about, like, well, you can cut out all the racing games, or you can cut out all the sports games. They might be like, well, get Cruisin' USA. That's on that system, right?
Yes.
I didn't want to mix it up with Daytona. Yeah, so it's like, oh, you want a racer? Get Cruisin'. Or is Wipeout on it?
Yes. There was a version of Wipeout on the N64.
Yeah, so people are like, get those two. Don't get the other 200. So right. It's a strange game because looking at what's available, even though there are a lot of sports and a lot of racing and a lot of wrestling, I wouldn't call any of them shovelware. But there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
So it's a strange game as far as selection goes because I'll give this little point. I feel that all of the first-party Nintendo games on the system, excluding maybe Paper Mario, have sequels that do what those games do a lot better. For example, I have a great deal of difficulty getting into Ocarina of Time, which...
right.
The quick side tangent is I tried to get into N64 when I got my Wii because that was the easiest way for me to get them because, I mean, everybody knows emulating it's a horrible time. So I tried to get into N64 and it helped that I had a different controller. But the issue is that I'm trying to play Ocarina after I've played Twilight Princess.
Right.
And some people would probably get upset by that, but I think Twilight Princess is almost the same game. It's just done better. It has some, it has Wolf Link and stuff like that, but the dungeons are similar. You go to a fire, a water, a forest dungeon. You go to the Sky Temple, You go to the Temple of Time. Like, to call Twilight Princess a soft remake of Ocarina, I don't think is stretching it too much. And then there's Mario Odyssey, or even Sunshine, which I haven't played, but I'm sure there's some people that are like, nah, Sunshine's a better game than 64. So
Yeah.
the point I'm trying to make is that I think without the nostalgia, which isn't a bad thing, mind you. If you prefer a game because of nostalgia, like if you prefer a Mario 64 to a Mario Odyssey, that's your prerogative. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think me lacking that nostalgia makes it very difficult to look past the issues of N64 games because they're primitive 3D games.
Right.
So as far as game selection, that's what turns me off a lot from enjoying the system, and I think it turns other people off from enjoying the system because they could get a GameCube, a Wii U, or a Switch, and get similar games that are done better.
Yeah. That's
that's kind of my whole point on the game selection.
Yeah. And that's totally a fair point to have. I think for me, a lot of it does stem from nostalgia. You know, there are aspects of it that I still really enjoy because of just the fondness of playing so much of it. But there are those few games that just have not seen any sort of rebirth or reimagining on the system that I do think are still worth maybe not like purchasing a system to buy some of those carts because some of them are getting up there in price, especially if you're we'll talk more about it in the next point, but like especially if you're looking for the packaging and the box to go with the said game. Some of those are just like they're getting up there. But I would say it's something like I would recommend it. It's like if you want the actual hardware experience and you have the disposable money to do so, an EverDrive is an option, and you could put these few games like because you're right. There's been a million re-releases of Ocarina of Time. It's not that hard of a game to play anymore. Probably, I personally recommend the 3DS version because it's such a huge graphical improvement. It looks fantastic and it looks more modern and feels more modern, and you got it portable. So I mean, you get all sorts of benefits for just playing that version. I would recommend Star Fox 64, the 3DS version. It is a huge improvement graphically. It does things nicer, like things just look really, really good. But graphics are not always everything, and they did remove the POV mode, which was a huge, huge missed opportunity for the 3DS. I have no idea why they removed that mode. It just baffles my
mind. I didn't know about that, and I'm baffled.
Yeah, like I was dumbfounded. I thought the 3DS was like shit. 3D's the gimmick. That's the game to sell the system. Basically, is an on rails flight shooter. You know that you could zoom into the cockpit with. Like I baffled. Side tangent aside, but there are those few games. I know some people don't necessarily hold every game in high esteem. That are these few games that I haven't ever seen another retake. But there's a game like Mischief Makers, for example. I enjoy that game a lot. I know a lot of people don't really care for it, and that it's very mixed, like who you ask. Mystical Ninja Star and Goemon, and then Goemon's Great Adventure. The Mystical Ninja series, like I forget the actual Japanese name, but that series has been dead in the water since the N64 era. Like, we didn't see a GameCube game. We didn't see any sort of new game for that series, and it was a prominent series that Konami had. So it's one of those weird things where it's like, if you want a good game, that's the only way you can play it is on the N64. There are a couple other ones, like I recommend the Extreme G racing games. Like, I think those games are fine. Jet Force Gemini, but again, that's another one that you can easily play now. The Rare Replay collection exists, and if eventually that ever sees the light of day on PC, it's like, well, all those games, even Conker's Bad Fur Day, will be available to a huge audience that can just, hey, buy this game through Steam, and you can play these games on your PC. Donkey Kong Country 64, I know a lot of people don't necessarily like that game. but it's another one that's there. Of course, people could say Donkey Kong Country Returns on Wii is way better, and I, to an extent, agree. Like, it definitely felt more traditional to what made Donkey Kong Country so good in the original. In the original, so there are those few. Like, it's probably not a huge list, and this is just speaking from an American experience. Like, I can't even comment on like what Japanese exclusive games are out there that might be good on the N64. I think like the only one that ever really even saw the light of day over here was a game called Sin and Punishment, which is an on-rail shooter. So other than that, like, I really don't have any knowledge of if there's any like very specific N64 titles that are out there for the Japanese market. But to wrap this point up, is I feel that there are those few titles that are worth it, but I agree with you that it's definitely easier for a lot of the mainstay titles to just get them through other means.
Right, to either, when you could, you used to have the option of buying a lot of them on the Wii Shop.
Yeah.
Emulation's still very difficult, obviously, but yeah, or the further extension of that point, like I said, buy the newer version, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So our next point, since I did bring it up, was game design and packaging. So since we're talking about the N64, obviously the main thing about it is its cartridges. So
cartridges are awesome. I think when I think of handling a video game, like I'm gonna put it into the console, cartridges will always be 1,000 times more satisfying than CDs. Even new stuff like the Switch or the Vita carts, I find putting it in that spring-loaded, slot is more satisfying than a disc, like auto loading in or something like that. Like, if you want to talk discs, it's got to be older stuff like the PlayStation 1 where there's a little bit of mechanics to it.
Yeah.
The packaging, I think N64 boxes are pretty cool, actually. When people actually have them boxed, whether it's aftermarket boxes or not, they look really cool on a shelf because they got that red stripe on the side. The logos usually really pop out. So it's like even when we go to our local store, even though it's a bunch of garbage, it's a bunch of sealed. No, I'm not even trying to make a joke. Like, everything he has sealed there. What is it, like Wave Racer or something?
It's a lot of titles that I wouldn't bother buying.
It's stuff nobody wants. So it's still cool. It's like, oh, there's a stack of N64 games.
Yo, Sir Brandel, thank you for the follow, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I thought you were already following me, you asshole. It's one of the IAS guys, so.
Right. So, as far as the packaging and the cartridges, without turning into too much of a tangent, it sucks there's no end labels.
Try hard.
And to side tangent about that, Super Famicom games don't have end labels either, so I think that's kind of where the idea comes from. The Super Nintendo games, they're like, we still got to make it look like an NES cartridge because that's what they know. So I think that's why Super Nintendo cartridges still have end labels, but I'm pretty sure the N64 cartridge design is ubiquitous between the two countries.
Yeah, it's so weird that you say that because like the end labels were never a thing in the Japan cartridge market because I have a Famicom game here and it doesn't have a freaking end label. So
I have never seen Japanese Mega Drive games, so I don't know if they have labels.
Yeah, it's so weird that's just kind of a thing, and then there's like people were kind of like, I know that's actually kind of a thing that people like comment on about being like, oh, why did the NES and the Super Nintendo have end labels, but the N64 didn't have end labels here? It's like, because it just never did over
right, because they stopped changing the cartridge design between the two countries.
Yeah.
And side tangent, you also got to think about how Japan takes better care of their video games anyway.
Yeah.
You can get boxed Super Famicom games very easily in Japan. Even though they're cardboard, you can just get them very easily. They don't throw them away like they do over here. And I mean, that kind of leads into my complaint is that it sucks that you can't get as many N64 games in the box. That really sucks.
Yeah. Without paying
You
an
know,
exorbitant fee.
right. And growing up, even though I didn't want to, I ended up having to throw away boxes. So it really sucks. You know, I think that's the situation for a lot of people growing up, is that they just did not have control over it, or people didn't see the value in keeping the box.
Right.
You know, there are certain situations where that increases your value by hundreds.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous.
I think even James Rolfe brought it up because he talked about the whole end label thing in one of his older videos. He brought up that it's like, you know, people just don't keep the boxes, and I think it was kind of one of those things where we didn't necessarily realize at the time. Like, I don't think anybody really thought like how big the retro market was going to be, you know, 20-30 years down the line, and that was going to be so important. And like for me, it was just like, it was ease of convenience to store things, because like when I think about like the Game Boy Advance, for example, like you can't store those boxes in a carrying case. Like I had a carrying case for my system, and so it was like, I want to be able to just carry the game with me. I don't want to have to take boxes with me everywhere. And so it could have been that. It was just, you know, some people just may have not thought it to be necessary to store it in those, whereas like, oh, you could just slide it up on a shelf, or you could just put it in a drawer. You know, it's a cartridge, like it's durable, it's flexible, it's not this like, you know, the box, however, you know, is going to get damaged the more you open it, the more you close it, and it's not easy to take care of and maintain unless you're specifically wanting to do that. And so, you know, I think it was just kind of like an out of sight, out of mind thing, and no one really cared. It was just like, oh, it's cardboard. Didn't know this was going to make or break the difference between making, you know, a game that's $20 lose $200. You know?
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous when you get into those cartridge games that came in cardboard.
Yeah.
In this point, you know, you have game design. Are you talking about the cartridge design, or are we going to get into the more nitty gritty about like the general games between each system?
More just like design, like how they did the like the cartridge, like, and how it looked compared to like the discs and stuff like that. You know, more just general.
Yeah, we'll have to get into like the game versus game aspect after this.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we loop back around to the PlayStation's designs and stuff.
Yeah.
So overall, I'd say my favorite thing about N64 games is looking at them.
Yeah. Yeah, they do. If our local shop has anything to say, and again, you know, no offense to him and his selection, but he doesn't really have a lot of good stuff up there. Goes quick when he gets it, but it looks nice. It's definitely nice when he, like, especially the way he has them displayed, where they're all lined up, facing out. It looks nice to look at. Like, I definitely agree with that. And to kind of go off and, you know, talk about my own perspective on it, I do agree with you. There is a more satisfying feeling putting in a cartridge than there is putting in a disc. And there's also kind of this notion in my head, it's a lot easier to put in a cartridge and not damage it as opposed to putting in a disc, because that's one thing I've noticed with some of the disc-based consoles, some of the older ones, at least in my experience, especially when they were like top loaders before the automated, you know, just put it in through the automatic tray, you know, is that if it doesn't sit properly and you try to close the door, you might smack the disc, or, you know, if you don't set it properly, you might scratch the laser, you might scratch the disc itself. It's just a number of things make it a much more careful experience, I would say, when it comes to discs. With cartridges, you don't really have to worry about that. Now, granted, you don't want to slam your cartridges into your fucking, you know, cartridge-based systems. Like, you want to make sure that they're going in nicely. You don't want to just like slam that shit in, you know. But, you know, you're a lot less likely to damage your cartridges than you are your disc-based media. In terms of
So are you saying you don't yell "boom shakalaka" every time you put a cart in your N64?
No, I don't think.
Okay, that was pressing information that I needed to know.
I don't think I've ever done that, but you know, maybe if I could, you know, like throw it and like so it's like practice, like be like super good at throwing it, and like so where it goes in, if I threw it, then maybe. But no, and I'm a night owl, man. I live with people. I can't do that. I can't do that shit while I'm living with people.
Sorry to interrupt you.
But so talking about like the packaging, like we've already kind of touched more or less on the cardboard issue, but you're like, I do think in terms of like consistency, like I do like that the N64 packages are pretty consistent across the board. Not to say that PlayStation isn't consistent as well, but there's just like this really nice, like they have sort of like this base where it's like got the green and the red stripe and the orange, and then they have the different games graphics depending on whatever game it is, and you get a pretty decent amount of information on the back when you're reading about it, just good description, good screenshots, so you get a lot there. Of course, the issue that stems from anything cardboard doesn't keep well, gets damaged really easy. It's not something that's usually a lot of people don't think about keeping it. It's just more or less just, oh, just toss it, you know and it's one of those things too that even like getting them sealed, or if they've been in, like, if you store them improperly, they're going to get damaged too, because there's all sorts of different things. Like if you put them out in a box in a garage somewhere, it's like bugs could get in there and chew through it. There's just so many aspects of it that can ruin those boxes. But if they're in pristine condition, and I have seen a couple of the games that I own, the harder ones, they're more expensive just because they have the box. When they're in pristine condition, they're freaking really awesome to look at. So
Right.
that'll definitely say. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it for me, at least, when it comes to packaging and game design.
Cool.
So, time to loop back around and talk about the PlayStation 1 now.
All right, so the PlayStation 1, best console ever. No. No. Design-wise, I hate that the PlayStation 1 is gray.
Yeah.
Or white. If you have the smaller one, it's more white than gray.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand what the appeal was behind that color choice. All of the colored PlayStation 1s are very specific as to why they're colored, and that makes them extremely expensive. So if you want to...
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
Sorry.
I understand what you mean. I have the chat up too.
Oh, okay.
So,
okay. I didn't know if you did or not. That's what it is.
Yeah. But we can't be talking about this stuff in current year, man. You're gonna get this podcast ruined. Anyway.
Oh my god.
No, so I've never found gray a very appealing color for pretty much. Okay, I lied. The only thing that gray is good for is old PCs.
Fair enough.
And the NES is fine. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that I think it could have benefited to not be gray, especially as the N64 started bringing out
God
colors.
damn it, guys.
I think it's a case of it's similar to the Genesis versus the Super Nintendo, where the PlayStation was like, well, we don't want to be loud and vibrant and look like a kid's toy. Mm-hmm. Because the PlayStation was very clearly marketed for an older audience. Not even really teenagers. It was straight up kind of marketed for, adults. Mm-hmm. At least as far as the actual buying of the console. So as far as everything else goes, it's nice that it offers, I'm gonna say it wrong. It offers composite and coaxial. I actually had to use the coaxial growing up.
Oof.
Didn't have a TV that had the 3 special little slots on it yet. So, when you put it into that time frame, of course it would offer that.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
So that's kind of a moot point. But it's really cool how if you get the older ones, you can get a higher quality audio chip. So if
Yeah.
you get like the actual launch models, I forget the serial number, but you can get a higher quality audio chip, and people get it specifically to listen to CDs.
That's so weird to me, honestly.
Right, but I'm kind of rambling here.
It's
But
alright.
what I'm trying to say is, you'll have to remind me because it's been so long since I handled one. The N64's power is a sliding button, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So I think the push button for reset, eject, and power is probably the best thing about the console's design
Mm-hmm.
because it makes everything really flush, and it's a spring-loaded part, so it's going to last a long time. Not that a slide wouldn't. There's nothing that's really going to break on either,
Mm-hmm.
but it definitely helps in making the console feel more futuristic.
Yeah, I could see that.
That's about all I have as far as the physical design of the console.
Yeah, I pretty much share the same sentiments. The color choices, not the greatest, especially because with age and if they've been mishandled, especially the revision model, the Model 2 with its white aesthetic, thing scuffs to shit. Like
Oh yeah.
mine that I have with the screen attachment, which super nice by the way. Um, it I always I have to bring it up. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to flex
I'll
on
get one
you.
eventually.
When you steal mine, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Just like your super ghouls and ghosts is gonna go missing one day. Uh, oh my god. But yeah, so like the white aesthetic of the system just it scuffs, it gets really messed up super easily. That's the same across with anything. That's why I prefer like not having that specific color with like controllers,
Hmm.
with systems, just anything like that. Um, However, I don't necessarily think the overall design was not bad. I never had the first gen model, so like I never had the boxy gray PS1. I do know that they're a lot easier to maintenance, which is super nice. They're super easy to get into. It's not that hard to swap out parts with new ones, so that's super
Hmm.
nice. Especially that it keeps those things around and um, you don't have to do like super heavy refurbs or anything like that. I think the Model 2s, the Slims, are a lot harder to get into because they're a lot smaller, so there's smaller
You have to
parts
take
and
them all the way
pieces.
apart, is all.
Yeah. With the boxy gray model, it's just like you just literally pop open the case. It's like it's all there. It's super easy. You could probably put a beer in there if you wanted to, because there's just so much empty space. But yeah, in terms of like just that aesthetic, yeah, it's I do prefer the Model 2 just because of its form factor. It's small, it's sleek, and I just smacked my mic. I tried not to fucking do that. God damn it. Um, I put I did this whole setup just so I stopped doing that, but I get animated when I talk, so. um, but yeah, like the Model 2 I prefer just because it's smaller, it's sleeker, doesn't have any sort of rough edges that you have to worry about being like filed down or anything like that. Uh, it's easier to put up on a shelf and easier to store. The original gray model is fine in my opinion, but I do think that a lot of what you said with the aesthetic, where it's they chose certain things over what Nintendo was doing, like push spring buttons and eject, and having the top loading design with the disc and everything like that. I do think it was more to appeal to the idea of it being, oh, this is the future. This is the future of gaming that we're establishing here.
Uh
No,
oh.
that's
Oh,
I
you
was.
were cutting out.
Oh, was I? Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. So, but no, that's all I have to say on that. So we can move on to now the controller options for the PlayStation, which I know of a few weird ones, but not a lot. So,
I should have come prepared with the picture of the weird JoJo's Bizarre Adventure stick.
oh shit, yeah, that weird one that you bought that the second player didn't work.
Yeah. Um,
I forgot about that damn thing.
Yeah, but without getting too much into it,
Oh my god.
that's one of the first things that stands out to me is that in the small window where the PlayStation existed but the Dreamcast didn't, and people weren't or didn't own a Saturn, the PlayStation 1 had serviceable ports. They weren't perfect, but it's better than, for example, like Street Fighter 2 on Genesis. So
Yeah.
what's cool about that is that
Fucking Jozo.
there were plenty of arcade sticks for the PlayStation 1. Some of them, they're a little goofier looking. Some of them, like the one I'm talking about, it's like 3 foot wide, and it's a 2-player arcade stick setup. So I don't know how expensive the thing was when it came out. I think I bought it for $80.
Yeah.
And was gonna refurb it. But yeah, so the point I'm trying to make is that it has a good amount of serviceable fighting game ports. So the fact that there's so many arcade sticks for it is a good thing.
Yeah.
Then on top of that, there's so many people that don't remember the actual original PlayStation controller. Everyone associates the DualShock with it.
Yep.
Because it was such a big deal that even in games that don't use the freaking sticks, like people are like, no, this is, I just use this.
Yeah.
Everybody has the DualShock. There's not a lot of people that have it without the sticks because why would you? And I actually need to look up something about the DualShock.
I knew what you were talking about, Kaneki. Yeah, it always kind of slips my mind that was it though. That they were like, hey, we like the Nintendo thing didn't work out, so would you want to partner with us? And Sony's just like, nah, it's fine.
Yeah, that's a podcast in itself about all of how all of that went down. But anyway, the DualShock didn't come out until '98. Just had to look it up, and I believe it was basically made so that Ape Escape could be playable.
I think so. Yeah.
Because the way Ape Escape works, it actually uses both sticks.
Mm-hmm.
And that really changed the game because it's funny that, this DualShock comes out, but then you have people worried that they're going to make a game that only uses it, like Ape Escape. So even into the PS2 era, we had games that had camera controls on the shoulders still.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Which is bizarre to think about. But I think the DualShock is a really interesting answer, because that was probably a talking point, was like, well, the N64 has an analog stick, and it allows you to do more precise 3D movement. Mm-hmm. So Sony was like, well, what if we had 2 of them? So I think it's an interesting answer to the N64 Trident controller. I mean, mine doesn't work, so I guess that's my only complaint, is my DualShock 1 doesn't work, but that's wiring problems. I remember the vibration in the DualShock 1 being very powerful in comparison to the PS2 controllers. And did the original... No, that's part of why it's called the DualShock, then, because the original doesn't have vibration either.
Yeah.
Do you know if the Rumble Pack happened first for the N64?
I want to say because when Star Fox 64 came out, that was when the Rumble Pack came out, because it was like the big deal about, oh, you can have this thing and it reacts to stuff that happens in the game. So it was packaged with Star Fox.
The Rumble Pack came out a year earlier.
Wow.
So Sony basically had to go, well, we need both of those things, and it became a new controller.
Well,
go ahead.
Well, and to think about it even this way, it's like the Rumble Pack might, Sony actually kind of like were more innovative with that when you really sit and think about it, because it's like the Rumble Pack has to go into the N64 controller, and so does your memory card. So you
Mm-hmm.
either
You can't have
choose,
both.
you can't have both at the same time, but freaking place like Sony was like, nah, your memory card goes into the system, doesn't even touch the controller. So it's like, here you go.
Yeah, it's just such a weird, like, divergent in designs, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, my bias is already clear. Like, I'm gonna prefer the DualShock. I think it's a really great evolution on what the Super Nintendo controller was,
Mm.
because really all it did was add the grips and add two more shoulders,
Yeah.
and then later added the sticks. And you know, look at the 360 controller, look at the Xbox controller, look at the Pro controllers for all the Nintendo systems. They all have the grip extension.
To answer your question, Jozo, it was not the Rumble Pack that did that. It was the expansion pack, and that actually went in the system. So with the
Mhm.
N64, you just like flip up a little top, and there's a thing called a jumper pack in there, and you actually need that. That's the RAM to start the system. So when you replace that with the expansion pack basically just has more RAM, and so it allowed for certain games to utilize it. Not every game did. There were like three games that required it, and it was Majora's Mask, Perfect Dark, and Donkey Kong Country 64. And then every
Yeah,
other
Donkey
game,
Kong would straight up break at a certain point. Am I right?
uh,
Well, no, I'm sorry, it wouldn't break, but there was a bug that would happen if you didn't have the Rumble Pack.
if you didn't have a Rumble Pack,
No,
like you didn't have,
I'm the expansion pack. Sorry.
um, I thought it was required. I thought you couldn't even start the game if it didn't, because I know Majora's Mask, it just shows the title screen. It's like you
Mm-hmm.
don't have the expansion pack, so you can't play. So I thought it was that. I
Well,
thought it was that way, but I could be wrong. I
I'm
could be
I'm
wrong.
conflating information a little bit, so I apologize. But they developed the expansion pack specifically because they were having issues, and that was the solution to the issue while Rare was developing it.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
What I was trying to say.
that makes sense. Yeah, because the game was packaged with it. There was a way that you could get the expansion pack with Donkey Kong Country 64.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you have any input about the DualShock, go ahead.
I'm right there with you, man. Like it as much as I love the N64, the DualShock is just it's the superior controller. Like just hands down. Like no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Um, they stand the test of time. Like unfortunately yours doesn't work, but most of the ones that I have, even that have just been hanging out in boxes for like the last freaking decade, they all still work. They're functional. They offer everything that you need. It's comfortable to feel in the hands. I was going to bring this up, though, because there are a lot of people, and I've seen this multiple times, who do not like the stick placement. They don't like having the sticks right next to each other. They prefer the Xbox approach where one stick is up to the left and the other stick is down to the bottom. What is your take on that?
I 100% prefer it, and I'll be transparent about it. It's because I played that way first. I
Right.
never found so like I'm the complete opposite. Like when I first played an Xbox, I'm like, why is this here?
I was the
This
same
be
way.
here.
I
Yeah.
was the same way.
So I mean, that didn't turn me off as much as the fact that the thing weighs 50 pounds. But
The Duke.
yeah, because I just find I find it a little bit frustrating that Nintendo does the same thing. You know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I mean,
even with the Pro. Yeah.
it's such a subtle difference that I'm not gonna be like I have to figure out how to hook my DualShock up to my Switch. There's nothing that's making me go like that. But
Brook converter.
yeah, I'm gonna Brook convert my PS4 controller to play on my Switch. It doesn't bother me enough to where it's that. But if I could say, if I had the option to buy a Switch controller where the stick was where it is on a DualShock, I would play with that controller 100% of the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just a preference. It's not like, wow, I can do this technique because the stick is here. It's nothing like that.
Yeah. And to me, that was never an issue. Like it was kind of that weird thing where like I've never felt, because some people say that like with the sticks being next to each other that it cramps their hands, and I've never had that issue. So I don't necessarily know why that has been a talking point for as long as it has. I just thought it would be interesting to bring up. And just to go over what Jozo was saying real quick, according to Rare programmer Chris Marlowe, the company could not resolve a bug that occurred without the expansion pack, and thus were forced at great expense to bundle the game with the memory upgrade. And that's an excerpt from the wiki. And
Mm-hmm.
also, yet I can't find a stable 64 emulator. That might change.
No, no.
That might change, but I mean, yeah, you and everybody else. I mean, it's like at least I could say that progress on the N64 emulator was a lot better than the fucking like archaic way you have to play Saturn games the way that I do. Like, trust, N64 emulators work a hell of a lot better and they're easier to set up. But you know, that's at least my opinion. But to get back to controllers, I do want to comment that there are those. Xanthan talked about the arcade sticks that are out there. There is a flight stick, which is really cool. It's interesting because it's two flight sticks on one pad. So it's this really interesting thing, and apparently it actually does. It only works for certain games, so it was designed exclusively to play certain flight simulators that are available on the PlayStation One. Um,
Does it work with air combat?
that's an interesting thing. I don't remember if it does or not. Like I'm trying to remember because Re-Res did a whole video on this fucking thing. So if you guys have not have not seen it, definitely go look at his video because he goes more in depth about it than the surface level knowledge that I remember from that video. But yeah, it just like there wasn't really, when it came to like super like crazy sort of innovative controllers, you didn't really have that with PlayStation. PlayStation was like you had the regular PlayStation controller, then the Dual Shocks, you usurped it and basically kicked it off the throne. It was like, here's the better, more refined controller for your gaming experience. You have the flight stick options, you have the arcade stick options. I do think there's a race wheel, but I cannot
Oh,
remember
most
it.
definitely.
I cannot remember it. It probably does actually look more like a traditional racing wheel than what you would get from the N64, for example.
Mhm.
But oh, there was that one. Re-Res also talked about this. It was for racing games. It was like this weird Namco controller that you turned, you twist and turned. Like it had like a gear in the middle, and you could like, yeah. I remember that controller. So there are those few unique controllers, to say the least, on PlayStation, but they're not nearly as prominent, or people don't remember them as much as like the N64 stuff.
Right, or they only work for a couple games. Like there's a fishing rod.
Yeah,
There's a fishing rod for the N64 as well. There's a
yeah.
fishing rod. Trying to think of what else there is. Um, Neither game had any instrument controllers, huh? Because those weren't as big yet.
Did
There was rhythm
the
games.
um did the game, the one with the drum, did that come out on the PlayStation 1? Was there a PlayStation 1 version of
No,
that?
it was arcade and then
PS2 or
PS2.
PS2? Okay. Because part of me wanted to think, oh no, there's a drum, but yeah, no, I don't think there was any controllers like that. I want to say that became more prominent on like PlayStation 2 and
Mm,
forward.
yeah, for something I wanted to bring up that came to my mind. How do you feel about the N64 and the PlayStation 1 removing convex buttons? So
Oh,
the bottom two buttons of the Super Nintendo, or I'm sorry, is it B and Y? They're convex so that they fit against your finger. Um,
uh, yeah, it's yeah, B and A are yeah, convex, and then X and Y are concave.
mhm. Yeah. So how do you feel about those being removed? Because me personally, I would like to see that come back instead of everything we've gotten now
Mm.
is convex or concave. I'll never remember which is.
Everything now. So like looking at like the Xbox controller, like everything is convex. Like on the
Okay.
as I smack my mic again. Um, So I would say it's not a deal breaker for me. Like, I it's weird that they changed that. Like that didn't become a mainstay in most future iterations of consoles, but
Mm-hmm.
it's never been something that like was like a huge like because I didn't play the Super Nintendo enough to like back in the day to like really know the difference. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's not necessarily something that's a hang up. Like I'm fine with how controllers are. If a controller came along that did that, I would probably be interested in it, to say the least.
Yeah, it's just one of those little quality of life things that I always think about with the Super Nintendo controller, where I'm like, I
Mm-hmm.
miss this,
Yeah,
especially for a game like Mario, where you're going to be holding a button down constantly. It's
yeah,
nice,
yeah, definitely. I can definitely
and
agree with
I
that.
think that I don't know, but I would assume the design mindset behind that is like, well, we're adding two more buttons. You need to be able to tell them apart just by holding it, you know.
Yeah.
So that's the other reason I bring that up is I've found that like with every other controller, if I'm doing something where, for example, if it's a PlayStation controller where I'm needing to move my thumb across square and triangle a
Uh huh.
lot, I wish they were concave because that's more comfortable to do that.
Yeah.
You have to go between those two buttons a lot.
Yeah. I could totally see that. Yeah. So I don't really have much more to say on the controller options, so we can move on to game selection if you're good.
Sure. So game selection. I really don't want to sound too biased, even though the whole idea coming into this is like I'm the pro PlayStation guy,
Yeah.
and I feel like you enjoy both for their own merits.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna try to talk about it objectively because we have to really break it down to the fact that if you're somebody who likes to play a wide array of games,
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to get. I mean, you'll get fighters on the N64,
Yeah.
but they're going to be more experimental things. I always forget the name of the game, but it's the weapon-based one, and there's lava,
Mace.
and yes, Mace the
Mace.
Dark Age.
Yeah.
That's the fighting game on N64 that stands out to me because it's trying to do something with the 3D graphics, right?
Right.
You can move and stuff like that. The only issue is that while it doesn't have weapons, Tekken is going to beat it, 9 times out of 10 for people. You know,
Yeah.
you're gonna get the one guy who's like, no, I need the axe. I gotta play Mace.
Well, I mean, and if you really like want to dive into it, like there are weapon-based fighters on the PlayStation One, Soul Blade, the
hmm
precursor to what became Soul Calibur, and then
And
there's
of course, there's a launch title that's
you know
weapon based.
Bushido Blade. Yeah.
That was a launch title. No, so it's not like they were lacking in that department either.
Yeah.
So further,
Mm.
there's almost no RPGs on the system. There's Paper Mario, which is amazing.
Yeah.
And
RPGs
then
are
what is that? What is that one?
the one that's super expensive because I know which one you're talking.
The one with the blue-haired kid.
I think it. Yeah, I think he's purple haired, but there's Ogre Battle. Is that the one that you're thinking about?
No, it's a more generic name.
Quest 64.
Yes, Quest 64. That's the one.
Yeah, he doesn't have blue hair. He's brown hair.
Okay, my bad. I was probably mixing them up.
It's all
But
good.
yeah, it's like Quest 64 stands out as like, wait, this is your answer to
Right.
this? And I mean, it's like it sucks because Nintendo, the N64 would have been like crazy good if well, I mean, not what I'm trying to say is RPGs on the system would have been crazy good if Square hadn't split.
Yeah.
If there were Final Fantasies on the N64, they would be banging.
Yeah.
So, back to the point I'm trying to make. If you want to play a more wider variety of games that aren't racing, Nintendo games, which you have to admit, as wide of as appeal as they have, some people don't like them.
Yeah.
Some people don't like the kind of catch-all for lack of a better word, Disney approach that they have.
Yeah.
So then you go to the PlayStation, and you've not only got a port of almost all the Street Fighters that are out at the time.
Yeah.
You've got Tekken, which is being like co-developed at like on this arcade PlayStation-based hardware, so it's going to be perfect when it gets ported. You've got Bushido Blade, which I don't think holds up, but it had its appeal at the time.
Yeah.
As far as fighters go, and then there's not even a point in getting into like how great all of the RPGs are on the system. Not even just the Square ones.
Yeah.
The system just it was the perfect storm for like, let's make a bunch of pre-rendered backgrounds and throw these low poly models on them, and that's a game.
Mm-hmm.
N64 is more about more realizing of the full 3D space of a game, which PlayStation didn't start to do till later. I personally find that the games that are comparable between the two, so for example, Banjo-Kazooie and Spyro, I think just because of my nostalgia, I'll always feel like Spyro has more appeal.
Yeah.
But a lot of people really like Banjo. And there's something subtly different from what I've played of Banjo, where I feel more like it's a chore to collect everything, but I feel like Spyro encourages me to collect everything, because the way that the draw distance works is that the further away you are from a gem, the less you can see of it, and you can only see the sparkle. So you can go to that area. So it feels like it's a byproduct of letting you explore the 3D space, to be like, here's these things to pick up.
Yeah.
Whereas I haven't felt that from playing Banjo, and maybe I just haven't played enough of Banjo. So yeah, just my main point is that I feel like the games that are comparable, PS1 edges it out. They hold up a little bit better because of the different controller, and it has a better variety of what you can pick.
Yeah. I honestly, like, for the most part, I mean, I agree with you. As much as I love what the N64 has to offer, like, it's kind of this crazy thing when you think about it, because the Super Nintendo was the powerhouse for RPGs. Like, it was like just banger after banger. You've got, freaking Chrono Trigger, you have Final Fantasy 2 and Final Fantasy 3, which are 4 and 6 respectively, but you have just like all these really good RPGs, even like some offshoot RPGs, and Sega just did not have the answer to that. They had the Phantasy Star series, which I didn't get into the Phantasy Star series until way later with Phantasy Star Universe, so I can't speak for the older Phantasy Star games. They are there for those who enjoy them, but Sega just did not really capitalize on that market the same way that Nintendo did. And whether it be because of Square's partnership with Nintendo or not, Nintendo just had a huge variety of RPGs, and it's just so interesting that they just didn't have that same foothold with the N64. There are good RPGs on the N64. Paper Mario is probably the prime example. Like, Paper Mario is a phenomenal game, and I think that will always stand the test of time. And a lot of people could even, some people might, other people might not, but you could kind of see it as the successor of Super Mario RPG. And you have Ogre Battle, which is in its own right a good game, an expensive game because of that reason. But it's an alright game for what it is. It has a very visually appealing art style, but those are really the only two that you're really gonna have people talk about. You're not gonna have people. When it comes to Quest 64, the bag is very mixed. Like, you get the people. It's very split. It's, you either love it or you hate it. So it doesn't really have the traction that PS1 has when it comes to its RPG side. PS1 again, it just kills it with the freaking fighting game market. Now, granted, the N64 does have fighting games. It has Mace, which that's the only way, as far as I know, aside from like MAME or something like that, that you could play it on a console. I do not think
Mhm.
Mace was ported to the PS1, but it just doesn't have a lot of answers. There are some games like Fighters Destiny that stand out, but when it comes to the just straight ports of like Street Fighter Alpha 3, you've got the Darkstalker series, you have Darkstalker Night Warriors and Darkstalkers 3, you have the Samurai Showdown games. I do think that there is an N64 version. I don't know if that actually came out. I think
I'm
it
not
did.
sure either.
I think it did. It may not have come out here. I forget. But you just have like so many solid fighting games that are on the PS1, and aside from the hangups with some of the load times, they're still way better experiences. That's like the only benefit. Like when you compare like Mortal Kombat Trilogy on 64 to PS1, PS1 is far more enjoyable aside from the
Mhm.
load times. But if you don't want load times but a way lesser experience with like just not good audio and things like that, the N64 option is there. It, it must have been released on N64. I think there was one. I think there was a Samurai Showdown game on 64. I've never played it per se. Uh,
Well, I mean, it's not well received for a reason.
right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
The thing
because it was. I
is
think it
that
was 3D.
it was supposed to be for the Hyper Neo Geo, but
Oh,
that thing bombed too. So
yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Continue.
I will say that when it comes to like action adventure games on the PlayStation, I do feel that they're a little bit more neck and neck there. Like obviously Super
Sure.
Mario 64, it's a game that again, although Odyssey is definitely a contender for its successor, Super Mario 64 is just one of those ones that again will just stand the test of time, regardless of whether it be nostalgia or whatever the case may be. Video Game Donkey actually did a very very good video of why Super Mario 64 is so important and why
Mhm.
it has standed the test of time. And everything he said in that video, I absolutely agree with. And so, if you haven't seen that video, I definitely recommend checking it out. But
Yeah, I mean, because of Mario 64, that's the only reason Spyro exists to begin with. You know,
right,
I can't sit here and praise Spyro and then call Mario 64 a bad game.
right,
I can be upset about how the camera controls. That's really my
yeah,
hang up with it. But if that game did not exist, they would not have the blueprint to make Kingdom Hearts, for example. The path that thing blazed is
yeah.
you're unable to put it into words.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a wide variety of those games on 64 as well as PS1, but whether or not they're like comparable is really just to preference. But when it comes to certain genres, I do think the PS1 stands out a lot more than what the N64 does. I do think, and especially there too, like when you really sit and think about it, like there was more in the sense of like there were genres that just never showed its face on the N64. Like for example, the Clock Tower games. Like there wasn't horror games. Like the closest thing you got was like Doom 64 and the Quake ports. But like
Well, and you also got the Resident Evil 2 port, but
yeah,
it's another case of like nobody likes it.
it's an oddity. It's an oddity, that one. But like
Mhm.
that is something like when you really sit and think about it, there's just no straight on horror experiences on the N64 as opposed to the PS1. It's got a couple. It's like got Koei Tecmo's Deception, for example. It's got the Clock Tower
Mhm.
games. It's got various ports of Doom. Like there are more of that variety. So when you just like start picking into the library that the PS1 has, there are just more genres there on offer than what the N64 has to offer. Whether or not you like what the N64 offers as opposed to what PlayStation offers, I think it really comes down to preference. I'm not gonna sit there and say that Mystical Ninja is better than Crash Bandicoot or whatever the case may be. It really just comes down to what you expect out of the library when you get into said console. If you're looking
Mhm.
for specific things, I do think when it comes down to it, PlayStation just has more of it. It just has more to offer than what the N64 does.
Right. I feel like the N64 has two forms of appeal. It's the nostalgia appeal that we've already really thoroughly covered,
Yeah,
and if you really, really enjoy those action adventure games. If you want to play, if you're just a fiend for Goemon, Banjo, Donkey Kong, Mario 64, I know there's got to be more.
The Gex games, Gex 2 and 3 got ported.
Gex 2 and 3 are on there. If you are a super fiend for those games, that's where the N64 has the most appeal, in my opinion, if you are talking outside of nostalgia.
Yeah. Also, so Kaneki said, I like what both consoles had to offer, but PS1 offered more genres of games. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that one. Like, when you start diving into what the PS1 has to offer, it has a plethora of stuff that just the N64 just can't compete with.
Yeah, it's ridiculous because, you can, while there's a ton of racers on N64, I think that, you can go onto the PS1 and you can play Gran Turismo, and you can play Crash Team Racing, and what are some other...
Need for Speed.
On the PS1?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah, one of the first Need for Speed, I want to say, and then I want to say the first Hot Pursuit was also on PS1. There's the Driver series, Driver 1 and 2. There's...
It's like, look at how many different subgenres of racer you're getting.
Oh, shit. Yeah, Twisted Metal. Thank you, Kaneki.
Yeah, so then you've got car combat as well. So look at all the different little subgenres you get of just racing, and then you look at the N64, and it's like all the Daytonas, all the Cruisins, all of the rally racers, all of
yeah,
tons of jet ski games.
Sir Brandel said, objectively speaking, PS1 has a bigger library for anyone. Yeah.
Yeah, it has that broader appeal, and I think that really answers our question of like which holds up better. It's that broader appeal is going to hit more people, and so more people are going to go, well, I'm interested in this in 2020.
Yeah.
If there was somebody tomorrow that decided suddenly, I'm going to get into video games. Mm. Obviously they're probably going to buy something a lot more modern. But if the person tomorrow is going to go, I'm going to get into retro games, they're going to go for the thing that's going to offer them the most variety.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's there's the appeal of like, you don't even have to buy a PS1 to play PS1 games. You could buy a PS2, or you could even buy a PS3. So you could
buy a PS Mini for $20
if you wanted. If you wanted.
Mod it,
I mean, it's hit or miss with the PlayStation emulation, but I heard RetroArch is pretty good on a PS Vita.
You could buy a toaster PC and emulate all of it.
Mini-who. Yeah, exactly. I know. God, what a travesty.
Right.
Anyway, we still have we did not talk about game design and packaging yet for PlayStation. So if you want to take the floor on that,
sure.
We'll cover that real quick.
I appreciate PlayStation coming in CD cases because I was able to restore my collection.
Fair enough.
Basically, my collection that I had amassed, it was barely like 14 or 15 games. All of the cases got thrown out when my mother decided that she wanted more room in the house. So this year, actually, just a couple months ago, I actually was able to reprint all of my PlayStation games thanks to MobyGames.com and the Cover Project.
Yeah.
So from a collector's standpoint, if you have the patience and the money for ink, you can save yourself a lot of money and buy loose, and as long as you have CD cases, you can remake the packaging. It's going to be very difficult to remake cardboard, obviously. A lot of people for N64 buy aftermarket cases and do the same thing, reprint the art.
Yeah.
But as far as like, wow, I'm getting as close as I can to the original packaging, you can do it.
Yeah.
With I've invested a lot into it because I had to reprint a lot of stuff, and ink is expensive and goes away too quickly. But I have still spent less than if I rebought those games.
Yeah.
Because Two of the fuckers were Mega Man Legends and Legends 2. So
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, fair
I think
enough.
that I think it was really smart, packaging wise, to go with CDs because CDs were a big deal in the early '90s. They
Yeah,
always they have this inherent appeal. It was the most convenient form of physical media for a lot of things. People got computer software on it, and they got music on it. So
hmm,
it was like this natural extension. Like, oh, cool, I get it on a CD now. Um, and the artists were really attentive to it because you're never gonna design the inside of an N64 box, right? But I
yeah,
like that a lot of games, Mega Man X5 is an example. The inside art is printed onto the CD. So when you remove the CD, which is blue,
yeah,
now you can see the art in full color.
yeah,
So there's just so much more spots to put interesting packaging design because they had booklets, they had
yep.
the inside layer, and they had the back. Um, my only complaint with it is it's the beginning of greatest hits. So I
Yep.
don't know if you can really see because it's so far away, but if you have OCD, it can make collecting a little frustrating because some games it's going to be so difficult to find a non-greatest hits version, and sometimes the price difference is too much.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have some that have green spines. That's something you'll have to live with or go insane.
Yeah.
So that's definitely my number one complaint about the packaging for that.
Yeah.
Other than growing up, if you were not attentive enough, they would break, obviously.
Hmm.
Now, CD case isn't hard to come by, but at the same time, it could suck when, for example, my Legend of Dragoon, that case is still just destroyed. I need another one. So,
Yeah.
I mean, if you're a serious collector, you'll you might end up kicking yourself as far as that packaging goes. If the packaging on your N64 breaks, you probably weren't going to keep it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. So much of what you said, I kind of share the same sentiments. It's a lot easier to replace the artwork and to replace CD cases. I mean, I have a dad who's a freaking music enthusiast. He's narrowing
That's where all my
down.
cases came from. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. By the way, he's narrowing down his CD library, and so it's just easy to get a couple jewel cases to replace some of the broken ones that I had. Um, so it is something. There are those oddities like the multi-disc cases, and those are a pain in the ass to replace.
No, you just get Caesar's Palace over and over.
You just get all those freaking shovelware games.
Is
Yeah,
that game even 2 discs?
I think so. Yep.
Okay,
Yeah, it is.
because it's funny to bring up the packaging. I don't know if you've ever seen Legend of Legaia physically.
Not the first one. Not the first one.
It comes in a double case. It's 1 disc.
Oh, that's weird.
It had to come in the double case just to appeal because every other RPG was in those multi cases.
Yeah.
No, but it's 1 disc.
Shovelware games. Hello, we. Yeah. Yeah. That'll be a
Dear
discussion
God.
for another day. That'll be a discussion for another day. I'm sure we'll get to it eventually.
Yeah, the Wii and DS is probably the worst.
Ooh, yeah. The major oofs there.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, jewel cases, they're storable. They're a lot easier to store. They look
Mhm.
nice on the shelf when you got them all lined up. I'm sure you guys, if you follow me on Twitter, you've seen the pictures of my library. I know Mr. Avalanche Jared is like, now you got to fill up the shelves with more PS1 games. Get on it, man. And I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to. A lot of my games are freaking loose, and I'm not buying loose games anymore because I broke my Darkstalkers, and so yeah, that was shame. Yeah, because that's not a cheap game to replace. But like when it comes to just everything about it, the booklets were nice. The manuals were nice for N64 games too. Like I know we didn't really talk about that when we were talking about it from the N64 side of things, but
Yeah, I've never seen it in 64 yet.
I have 5 that have survived.
Wow.
I actually found them. My dad found in an old file cabinet of his. He had a bunch of like old manuals for like Lego sets and shit, and there were a couple of my N64 manuals in there. So fancy that. I actually have a couple N64 manuals. Not that it matters much, but you know.
Are they square or rectangle?
If I could dig one out, I'm not digging. They're in this drawer right here, but yeah, I can't dig them out right now. They're rectangle. They're rectangle, and they're like a PS2 manual. They're about the same size.
Okay, I see now.
Yeah,
Weren't the Super Nintendo manuals the same way?
I believe so. Yeah, because like the NES manuals were like little rectangles because they were like
Right, they're like kind of like Game Boy.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, I think PS1. It's with it when it comes to its packaging and overall design aesthetic. Like you said, like I really like what they did with some of the discs, like with some of the artwork that they put on the discs. I think that's a really nice touch. Um, some other games I know did it. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of any other than like Mega Man X5 being the prime example. But
Yeah,
it definitely is something that is a lot easier to store. It's a lot easier to replace, and it's just overall just more aesthetic. Not I wouldn't say it's more aesthetically pleasing, but I would definitely say that it's when you have them all lined up on a shelf, it's super nice. It's super nice. N64 has the same thing, So
yeah. I think because of the color coordination that an N64 box has way more appeal.
yeah.
But it's also has appeal because it's harder to achieve that.
Sir Brandel says I do miss the boxes from the '90s. Super Nintendo and N64 has some cool ass box arts when done right. Yeah, yeah,
For
exactly.
sure.
They
I
definitely do.
think F-Zero and Chrono Trigger are probably the best Super Nintendo boxes.
Kadeki says WCW versus NWO World Tour box art looks neat. I don't think I remember that one, but I would say if I could have the boxes for some of my favorite games on N64 and Super Nintendo, I fucking would. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it sucks that they're so expensive with those boxes that cardboard is super expensive. I think James Rolfe even said he's like, that's some expensive ass cardboard,
Mm-hmm.
But what do you do? What do you do? So we're going to move on to our next point. So basically, just talking about the systems today and what we feel about how they hold up when it comes to today. And we've kind of touched on this over the
Mm-hmm.
scope of the whole podcast. So I don't think there's going to be a lot more to add. But
Yeah, it's more like a wrap up. So
yeah,
it's just like, you know, part of the thing that made me bring this up was, again, I like to joke. Like,
right.
the thing that spawned it off was there was a post like your hottest gaming takes,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them was N64 is trash. And a guy I had never discussed the N64 with, a guy we both know, Lance, he commented, he's like, "Yeah, dude, it's really hard to go back.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many people that love GoldenEye,
Yeah.
but if they have been playing modern shooters, if they moved on to Halo or they've moved on to Call of Duty, it is
Yeah.
so hard to go back." And it's just an example of how far controls have come as far as like console first-person shooter games.
Yeah.
So you have to really be able to like drop yourself back into that mode to be able to play that game.
Yeah.
You know, but as long as you can do that, at least the nostalgia is there. But like the total unbiased point of like, okay, who can you really recommend the consoles to? It's got to be the PlayStation. And I find that interesting because the PlayStation, I think, lives as more of an in-between console because it has 2D games and it
Yeah.
has like games where your model is 3D but the background is 2D, and then it does have full 3D games. And so it kind of like offers a scope. And whenever I think of N64, it's always full 3D.
Yeah.
The 2D game I think about is like Paper Mario.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that the console that is technically less powerful has a worse medium because cartridges are better,
Yeah.
than discs, especially when it comes to like how they load memory and stuff like that. It's funny to me that that console probably has the broader appeal in 2020.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm pretty much of the same mind. Like when because I always look at things from my own perspective. Especially because I collect retro. It's like it's something that is very prominent in my game collecting, and it's one of those things where it's always something that I can never, in full conscience, recommend. Like, hey, if you want to experience this you got to experience it the physical way. Like, I will always be at the forefront of, hey, you should emulate it before you get into like the physical collecting. But if I were to choose a system to get into, I would definitely say PS1. It's a lot easier to get into PS1 collecting and being able to actually physically play the discs, because you can easily buy yourself a PlayStation 3 Slim and have full access to the PS1 library. You don't even have to
Mhm.
buy a PS1, and you have a built-in HDMI solution, so you don't have any hassle with a modern TV, and you can scale it. Like, you could blow it up full screen, or you could just keep it to its original resolution, and you could smooth out the graphics if you want, or keep it the jaggedness if you want that nostalgic feel. So there is just a way easier method to playing PS1 than there is N64. N64, it's like you've got to worry about, well, shit, if I don't have a TV that supports composite or S video, like I've got to either mod the system or get something like the Retro Tink, to upscale the system so I can display it properly on my TV or my monitor of choice. I've got to worry about cartridges, and again, those few games that are there that are good and there's no other way to play them, that's great, but they're expensive. Mystical Ninja Star and Goemon, like even just for the cartridge itself, I think is like 60-70 bucks. You add the box onto that and you double the price. So it's always one of those things where it really comes down to what does your budget allow. And I think personally there's really not a lot of super expensive PS1 games. There are those oddball titles like the Clock Tower games, Silent Hill's getting up there as being expensive. But for a lot of the more common stuff like the Crash Bandicoots, the Spyros, the Croc 1 and 2, well, Croc 2 might be a little bit weird, but like Croc 1 and 2, Crash Team Racing, there's a good pool of games that you can get fairly inexpensively, and again, you have a modern solution that you can buy to just alleviate any issues that you have running into compatibility wise. So I do. While I don't think the N64 is inherently like this god awful atrocious system, it's underpowered. It is that everything Nintendo is underpowered. That's just par
Right.
for the fucking course at this point when it comes to any of their systems. But there are worse systems out there. I personally feel like Atari Jaguar comes to mind. 3DO comes to mind.
hmm
Three.
There's so many things from that same time period that
Yeah,
are awful, like
yeah,
genuinely awful.
yeah. Uh, Sir Brandel says Super Nintendo was strong but slow. Yeah, I could see that. I definitely think um, in terms of what it had to offer as opposed to Sega, I definitely do feel that it had the foothold. Like that was probably, in my opinion, to diverge just a little bit, that was probably Nintendo's strongest system when it comes to its retro stuff. Obviously, the Switch is blowing all of its predecessors out of the fucking water. It's been the most successful Nintendo console to date, outselling all of its predecessors. So, but when it comes to its overall appeal and aesthetic, and the options that it has, I do think that the Super Nintendo, when you're looking at Nintendo's retro library, that's the strongest foot it had. Um,
hmm
the N64, while again, I can recommend certain games on it, it's definitely not for everybody, and it's such a fucking pain in the ass to get it to freaking be able on a monitor system, because not everybody's gonna want to hunk around a CRT. Like CRTs are cheap. Yeah, you can get a super, a small display, super cheap. You can find them all over the internet. People just have them in spades, and they're like, hey, I'm gonna like sell you these two for like $20, you know. yeah, you could do that, but most people nowadays, especially because they're so affordable, HD TVs are where it's at, HD monitors are where it's at, and so it's just to avoid all the unnecessary complications that run into running retro games on a modern display. It's just like the PS1 just beats it because it's like you can play all your PS1 games on a PS3, which is an HD ready console. Like you don't even have to worry about any sort of complications arising from, oh well, this game works but this game doesn't because the signal doesn't come in properly, which again, that's a huge discussion within itself. Refer to my first episode of Just Another Gaming Rant live talking about upscaling with Avalanche Jared.
And something important that I hadn't even thought of, at the time of this recording, the PlayStation 3's store is still up.
Yeah. Yes, it
the
is.
Wii's isn't. You can't get it. You cannot pay real world money for ROMs to get N64 ROMs through Nintendo right now.
Right.
So if you are opposed to emulation through the nefarious acquisition of ROMs, I guess is how I would put it, you can get a PS3 and you just wait for this shit to go on sale. And you get 20 games for $20.
Yeah, and the PS1 selection on the PS3's store is phenomenal. There's plenty of great games that you can dip your toes into, and like
almost all of the staples are there. Like I can't even think of something off the top of my head where it's like, damn shame they don't have that. Actually, I think the shame is that they don't have Legend of Legaia.
They have Evil Zone. They have Evil Zone, which is an obscure freaking anime fighting game, and it's there on the PlayStation on the PlayStation.
Yeah, no, Legend of Legaia is right on there.
Yeah,
it's already out. Legend of Dragoon, you can just go and buy it. Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9.
Parasite Eve 1 and 2, Silent Hill, Battle Hunter. No, I don't think Battle Hunter got ported.
No.
The Mega Man X 4, 5, and 6, I think all got ported.
4, 5, and 6, and
Legends 1 and 2, and the Misadventures of Tronbon, which, you know,
right? Why would you pay
$200 fucking dollars?
Unless you're diehard, why would you pay to have those physically when you can pay $30 to have them digitally?
Yeah,
you know, it's just that you just put up with the worry of like, well, you don't actually own them. You know, that's what you're giving up for this. But what I was going to say is that shoot, I lost my. But another thing I was going to mention is that the remakes of Mega Man 1 through 6 are also available, even though those are Japanese only.
Yeah.
So there are games on there that would be more expensive to import that you'll have access to just for doing that. And Nintendo offers nothing of similar at the moment.
Yeah, the closest thing they've got is the NES and Super Nintendo apps, but they've gone from, oh, we're gonna give you, you know, a couple games a month to now we're just gonna do it whenever the fuck we feel like. So
So you have access, you have legal access to ROMs if you have a PlayStation 3. And I think that really kind of seals the deal on it. Is that if you're the kind of person who doesn't even want to emulate, you have an option through the PS3.
Yeah. Kaneki says digital stuff got me this gen. I got Ninja Warriors on Switch digitally, $10 cheaper. Yeah, I totally get that. Like, you know, there is that appeal. Like, I am definitely the same way. If I can get a game bundled with a bunch of its DLC for a fraction of the cost of what I would spend going and buying a physical disc, I'll jump on freaking buying it digitally. Like, it does really come down to that. Like, there are those instances where the appeal is definitely like, oh, look, it's cheap, it comes bundled with stuff. I would spend, you know, $20 more going and buying it physically without all of that. So yeah, I definitely say that the digital market has a foothold. Again, huge conversation for another day. But so let's kind of go ahead, because I think we pretty much said everything. But if we have any final thoughts to add, let's go ahead and wrap this up in a nice little bow, so we can get on with our day and food, because I'm hungry.
Same. The PlayStation 1 has Final Fantasy 7, and it's the greatest game ever made. So that's the only reason why you should buy a PlayStation 1 or something that will play it. Buy a Switch and
Buy
play it on there.
buy a Switch and play it. Hey, you can buy a physical that comes with freaking Final Fantasy VIII Remastered if that's your thing.
Well, if
You
that's
know.
your thing, you gotta cut the cartridge in half and throw the 8 half out. So
If that's how it worked, oh my god, that's freaking funny. But
this
yeah,
is the stinky half. So
but yeah, for me, I think I've said it already. If I were to recommend any retro enthusiast to get into any console now, I would say that the PS1 is the way to go. Like it's there's just so many easier ways to play them, play the physical games, and to even buy the games. There's just so many easy ways to do it. And
yeah, I mean, look, we're trying to wrap up, and Kaniki's like, "Hey, you could play them on a PlayStation Portable or
yeah,
a freaking Vita."
you can buy Vita. Like there's a plethora of ways legitimately to get these games and to play them, and unfortunately Nintendo just does not offer that. And so while I want to stress this point, I do not think the N64 is a horrible system. I will never say that. Is it a is it dated? Yes. Does it stand the test of time? Is it going to stand the test of time like the PS1? I don't think it will. Because, especially too, because Nintendo is, it almost sort of feels like Nintendo's making an active effort to forget that these systems exist. Because you look at it like...
Even Nintendo thinks it sucks.
Yeah. But you look at it, it's like, what does Nintendo push, like, app-wise? It's like, oh, here's NES games. Here's Super Nintendo games again. Like, you could even buy NES and Super Nintendo games through the 3DS, through its virtual console. So it's like, those are the games that they push. Those are the games that are going to, like, they're going to hold the nostalgia over more than the N64. Like, even GameCube is suffering that. Like, what's the only GameCube game? One game from GameCube got ported to the 3DS, and that was Luigi's Mansion. You know, just because, oh, hey, we've got a sequel on the 3DS, and we're making a third one. So,
right.
It's like...
And the only one that got ported to Wii U was Wind Waker.
Yeah. Oh, and Twilight Princess. I think there was a Twilight Princess HD, wasn't there?
Right.
Yeah.
There is, but it's difficult to consider Twilight Princess a GameCube game.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, because it came out on the Wii and game. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. So yeah, I just genuinely think like this is Daybreaker's recommendation. If you are wanting to dip your toes into the retro gaming world, PS1 is a good start. It really is, because there's a plethora of ways to play it. It's very accessible. And hey, you can play it on your modern display if you buy it, your stuff through the PS3, because it'll play it. So I will change my tone, however, if PlayStation 5 suddenly is like, hey, you can play your PS1 games on it. You know, we'll wait and see. I might have a different opinion. But, you know, Brandel, I will say this, like, Super Nintendo is a good start, but it's difficult because, again, you run into the issue of displaying it on a modern TV. You run into the issue that a lot of the good games, they're super expensive. Any game that I would recommend, aside from like the common run-of-the-mill stuff, it's like you're gonna spend a fortune playing it. Like Demon's Crest. Demon's Crest is my all-time favorite Super Nintendo game. It holds a very special place in my heart, especially because it was the only game that I played from start to finish with a friend who is no longer with us. You know, so it is very, very important to me. But getting a physical cartridge of it is going to set you back $100. And then, so let's say, for example, that is the one game you wanted to play on Super Nintendo. Like, and again, I don't want to like spend too much longer on this, but let's say, for example, that's the one game you want to play. So you have to buy the Super Nintendo. You have to buy a way to display it, like either through a RetroTink or an OSSC, or to display it on a modern display. You know, and then we're not even talking about like internal mods and things like that. And then you're set back $100 just to play on physical hardware. Now, if you were to emulate, if you are not opposed to emulation, yes, I will say NES and Super Nintendo are very, very easy to get into. I will say that they stand the test of time. Practically every emulator works. You won't run into any issues. Fuck, you could play that shit on your phone. You could literally get all the ROMs, however you do it. I'm not going to say how. I'm not going to tell you how, but you could get the ROMs, you could dump them on your phone, you could download the emulators, they're free, or you can even pay a small fee to just cut the ads, or you could just put it in airplane mode like smart people do. And you could buy yourself a Bluetooth controller. There's a ton that I recommend. 8-Bit Do, fantastic. Retrobit has a bunch of controllers. Or you could do the smart thing and connect one of your modern controls to it, like an Xbox One or a freaking PS4 controller. So,
or you could put them all on a PSP. So Sony wins again.
It all comes around. Circles and roundabouts, my friend. Circles and roundabouts. Okay, guys. Well, I think we have covered this subject thoroughly. It's a little bit shorter than the last one, but I think we've wrapped this up all nicely. So yeah, as always, I'm Daybreaker Rein. You can find me at here on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, and that's pretty much it. I'm pretty active on Twitter, so I fucking tweet a lot of shit. Sometimes I retweet things, believe it or not. I try to not to do that anymore unless it's something that I feel is worth it. If it's something that I'm super into and I like, or if it's game news that pertains to particular things, I'll retweet it. But I'm pretty active there. I'm trying to get back into streaming and everything like that. Example with this, we will have more of these down the line, and hopefully we will get some more people involved to have discussions about various things in the gaming world, retro and modern. So, Xanthan, tell people where they can find you.
You'll pretty much only find me on Twitter at Xanthan FGC. I retweet a lot of Gundam stuff lately, and I post my collections on there as far as like figures and Gundam models and games I've collected. That's mostly what you'll see on there.
Yeah, same with me. I don't mean to do it to gloat. I'm not showing off to be like, oh hey, it's a passion of mine. So I want to share it with the world, and I want to see what people have to say when I show pictures when I buy Shrek 2 for the third time.
Dear God.
Anyways, guys, that is the podcast. I hope you guys all enjoyed. If you are checking this out on YouTube, I appreciate it. I love the interaction that I get. The Final Fantasy VII Remake one did pretty well for what it was, so I hope this one does equally as well, and it's a subject that you guys find entertainment and value in, and I hope we covered it thoroughly. I know that we didn't really have somebody who's super stan for the N64. We tried, believe me. We tried to figure out somebody who we could add to this discussion that was like that. Unfortunately, I don't think they exist. If they do exist, they are a very niche demographic, and they are in a very dark corner of the interweb that I personally don't want to go dig one out of. So,
I mean, we could have called Chris, but
we could have, but he's dealing with stuff, so I don't want
to
be like, hey, come and have a happy-go-lucky time on a podcast with me. I'm sorry that shit's going on in your life, but so. But yeah, with that being said, guys, as always, I enjoy the interaction. Thank you guys for stopping by and watching and chatting it up. Appreciate it. Appreciate the hosting. Appreciate the new follow. So as always, guys, this has been Daybreaker Rein and Xanthan, and we will catch you all in the next one. Take it easy, everybody. And I've got to change all this shit.
Alrighty, are we off? Oh. No.